Bava Metzia Daf Chav Ches contains three mishnayos. We begin with the sugya of Simonim Deraisa or Simonim Derabanan, which we're in the middle of. The Gemara concludes it with a raya that the Gemara brings from a Mishnah. It says if someone finds a bundle of shtaros, documents, or a wrapped around set of them, then he should return it because there's a simon in the bundle. So we had said earlier that if simanim are derabanan, the reason why you're allowed to return it is because even if you're turning it to the wrong person, the one who is the rightful owner wants you to return it so that he has a chance of getting it back himself. But here, if the rightful owner is the leva and you're returning it to the malva, then the malva is going to collect from him, and they'll collect from him in a way that he's not officially supposed to. So the leva would not agree to that. He would not want that. So certainly you can't say that. So again, the question becomes, how do we have the right to return it unless you say simanim deraisa? So says over, this is a proof that simanim are deraisa, based on the pasuk says, you say the lost object should be with you until your brother claims it from you. You can't possibly think that you should give it back before he claims it from you, and therefore it must be telling me deroish achicha, you should inspect, you should check out, investigate your brother and make sure that he's not a ramai, and you should do that by asking for simanim. Rava now starts to say another halacha. He says if you want to say simanim are deraisa, so the Gemara right away interrupts. What do you mean? Rava just proved that simanim are deraisa. Why does he say if you want to say? First, it's not really a conclusive proof because you could always answer, like we said before, that inspecting is based on witnesses, and you're returning the tachrich shel shtaros based on witnesses, not based on simanim. But Rava seems to be leaning in that direction for sure, but it's not a conclusive proof. So now Rava discusses what happens if you have conflicts. You have multiple people who bring proof that is theirs. Who should you give it to? So if Reuven and Shimon both claim that the lost object belongs to them, and they both bring simanim, so they balance out, and you can't give it to either of them. You just have to wait until Elionavi comes and tells you what to do with it. If Reuven brings witnesses and Shimon has only simanim, witnesses still beat simanim, even though simanim are deraisa. If Reuven has simanim and Shimon has simanim and an eid echad, there the witness, the eid echad, the single witness doesn't count for anything. Single witness does not tilt the scale in the slightest. He's not neman in the halachos of mammon. Now, says Rava further, if you have witnesses that said that Reuven wove a talus and witnesses that say that Shimon dropped the talus, you should give it to Shimon, because you should assume that although Reuven wove it, he sold it to Shimon, and therefore Shimon is the one who dropped it. That way you haven't contradicted either set of witnesses. Now, if two people give simanim, Reuven gives a simon of how long the talus is, and Shimon gives a simon of how wide the talus is. Give it to Reuven who says how long it is, because Shimon can guess on his own how wide the talus is. That's an easy thing to guess, but how long it is harder. If Reuven gives the measure of how long it is and how wide it is, and Shimon says, I know the total of the length and the width, but I don't know which one's which, so of course give it to the one who knows specifically how long and how wide. If Reuven has how long and how wide, but Shimon has the weight of the talus, give it to Shimon, because the weight of the talus is a harder thing to guess, more likely that he knew that it was actually his talus. Now, if you find a get, and the husband and the wife are each claiming that it fell from them, the husband saying he did not divorce his wife with it, and the wife is saying that he did, and she's divorced. So, if they both say simanim, you give it to her, because that he has simanim on a get that he gave is not surprising, but that she has simanim on a get that she never received, that's impossible. Says Gemara, what kind of simanim are we referring to? If it's the length and the width, maybe she saw it while he was holding it in his hand, and she was able to estimate the length and the width by seeing it. Whereas says no, it's a more specific siman, like there is a hole next to a certain letter on the get. She can only have seen if she actually had the get. Now, if he says the siman of the string that's wrapped around it, and she says the siman of the string that's wrapped around it, you give it to her, again, because that's a valid siman. Whereas, what kind of siman are we talking about? Is it the color of the string? So maybe she saw it while he was holding it, so it's the length of the string. If they each say that it was found in a container, then you give it to him, because the fact that she knows it's in a container is not a proof, because she may just know her husband and know that he always keeps things in containers like that. Okay, now we begin our next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses how long one must announce a lost object that he found. So we have machlokes in the Mishnah. How long do you have to be machriz? Rabbi Meir says until the neighbors find out about it. The Gemara will explain what that means. Rabbi Huda says it's for 3 regalim. So if you found it just before Pesach, it would be Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and then for an additional 7 days after the third regal to give people a chance to go home. For 3 days, it takes them 3 days to get home, to inspect, make sure that they didn't lose anything, and if they did, to come back and claim the object from the person who announced it. All right, the Gemara asks, what do you mean when you say the neighbors? What are the neighbors of a lost object? If it means the neighbors of the person who lost it, so if you know the person who lost it, just return it to him. Obviously, you don't know the neighbors of the person who lost it because you don't know who lost it. So Gemara says, no, the neighbors of the place in which it was found, they have to hear about it. Now, about Rabbi Huda, we had said that it takes 3 days to go home. So the Gemara asks, well, how could you tell me that it takes 3 days to go home from Yerushalayim? We know that we start to say, asking for rain in the month of Cheshvan. According to one Tana, we start on the 3rd of Cheshvan. According to the other, we start on the 7th of Cheshvan. But the reason for that number is because it takes 15 days for people to get home from Yerushalayim, and therefore we want to make sure that everyone's home before the rain starts. So how can you tell me it takes only 3 days to get home? It takes 15 days to get home. So the Gemara gives a number of answers. The Gemara says, Rav Yosef says that 3 days was in the second Beis Hamikdash, and the first Beis Hamikdash took 15 days. The first Beis Hamikdash Kleisel was much more numerous, so they therefore had to live much further away, and therefore they lived all the way in the Har Pras, and therefore it took 15 days for them to get home. The Mikdash Sheni, the Kleisel was much less, and therefore they lived closer to Yerushalayim. The Gemara supports this with Psukim. The pasuk says, Yehuda v'Yisrael Rabbim kechol asher al hayom l'roiv. In the first Beis Hamikdash shows that they were very numerous. So, and in the second Beis Hamikdash it says kol ke'echad arba riboy alafim shalosh meis v'shishim, and it's not that many individuals. So Gemara asks that even though they were less, they still lived in the same cities they lived in before. Gemara quotes a pasuk. It says v'yeshua kahanim halavim. There says v'mashirim v'hashi'arim. They all lived in the same cities that they lived in before, and therefore they lived just as far away. So Gemara says, okay, so you're right, the opposite is true. They lived just as far away, but since in Bais Rishon there were a lot of people traveling, there were caravans, and they were able to travel at night, and it would be safe, and therefore they got home faster. However, when they, in the second Beis Hamikdash, there were far fewer people, and it was much more lonely on the road, and they could only travel in a secure way, and therefore it took much longer, and it took 15 days. Rava says a different answer. He says, doesn't make a difference. First Mikdash, second Mikdash, although it takes 15 days to get home, the Rabban did not want to bother a person who's returning a lost object. They wanted to make it easy for him, and therefore they said you only have to wait 7 days and not 15, which would be longer, 15 there, 15 back. So therefore they limited to 7 days. Now, says Ravina, you learn from the fact that they only give 7 days that the person who's announcing it announces what he lost. He says, I lost a coat. The person who's announcing it announces what he found. He says, I found a coat. That way, whoever thinks that he may have lost it can go home and right away just check to see if his coat is there. However, if he would not say what he found, he would just say found something, it would take a person a complete day to look through his house and make sure he didn't lose anything, and therefore it would require an extra day. Since you don't have the extra day, you see that he says what he found. Says Rava, not necessarily. It could be that really he did need that extra day, but they did not want to be matriach, a person who's returning a lost object. Now, says the Gemara, like we said, he has to announce it for 3 regalim. The Brisa says the first regal, he says this is the first regal that I'm announcing this. The second one, he says this is the second regal that I am announcing this. And the third one, he doesn't say a number. He just announces it. The reason is because we don't want the person to think that he may have more time. So the Gemara asks, well, why doesn't he then specify this is the third and this is there for the last time? The Gemara says that someone may mishear. Just like between the first and the second, you may mishear. There, you don't have to worry if it's the first or the second. Even if they hear wrongly, at least there's still going to be a third one. But we don't want him to mishear, and therefore we don't say any number, and therefore he will know that this is the last time, this is his last opportunity. The Gemara now brings two additional baraisas about returning lost object. First one says somebody who used to, in the old days, someone who found a lost object would announce it for 3 regalim, and after the last one, 7 days, like we brought an opinion in our Mishnah, in order that people should be able to go home 3 days, come back 3 days, and announce for 1 day. From when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they didn't do that anymore because they didn't have regalim. May it be rebuilt speedily in our days. However, the takana that they made was that they should just make announcements in the shuls and in the Batei Medrash. When there were anosim, when there were a lot of oppressors, which I'm going to explain soon, then they would just tell the neighbors about it, and that was it. What are the oppressors? Gemara says they used to say that any found object belongs to the king. Again, it's ended with Rabbi Ami, who found a kli full of golden coins, and he saw someone who noticed him, and he was visibly frightened. And that person said, "Don't worry about it, you can keep it for yourself. I'm not a Persian who says all found objects go to the king." This is Gemara. The second brisa, there's a rock in Yerushalayim called Even Etayin, the claiming stone. Anyone who lost an object or anyone who found an object would go there. That was the place for finders and losers to meet. And that was the place where you could give simanim and you could claim your lost object. Now we have the Mishnah that says when it rains a lot, go see if the Even Hatayin is dissolved. That's this rock. That's what we are referring to over here. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. The Mishnah says if somebody says what he lost, if he doesn't give simanim, you should not give it to him. A Ramai, a trickster who has a reputation for lying, don't give it to him even if he says simanim, because it says again, Adar Shechicha Isai, until you should be dairish your brother and see if he's a Ramai, if he's not a Ramai. So if you know that his reputation as a Ramai, don't give it to him. Okay, the Gemara introduces a machlokes, which we will try to prove from this Mishnah. Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman. What do you announce? Do you say I found something? Do you say I found a coat? Do you name the type of object? Rabbi Yehuda says you just say you found something, because otherwise people will be able to try to figure out, once they know what the object is, they'll try to guess some valid simanim. Rav Nachman says that you don't have to be chashish that people are trying to figure out the simanim, because then in the davar seif there'll never be an end. You could always suspect that they figured something out. So we're reading the Mishnah, our Mishnah, where it said that if he identifies what the lost object was, but it doesn't give simanim, you should not return it to him. Says the Gemara, if you're also identifying the lost object, so then why did the Mishnah need to say that if he identifies the object and doesn't give simanim, you shouldn't return it to him? He's saying the same thing as you. You said it was a coat, he said it was a coat. He didn't add anything at all. So the Mishnah would make sense. It must be that you just said you found an object, and he said it was a coat. And the Mishnah is teaching you should not return it based on that. You should have to give actual simanim. So says the Gemara, no, really I can tell you that you announce the coat. What the Mishnah means to say is even though I give simanim, if they're not good simanim, don't return it to him. It has to be what we call simanim muvhakim. Now, going further, the Gemara says that if he's a Ramai, you shouldn't return it to him. The Raisa that says in the beginning, anybody who lost an object, come and give simanim, and then they would give him the object that he claimed. Once there were a lot of tricksters who were figuring out ways to claim lost objects that didn't belong to them, they made a takana that they would make him bring witnesses that he's not a Ramai. Like it happened with Rav Papa's father, he lost a donkey, someone found it, and he came to Rabbi Bar Huna, and he said, bring witnesses that you're not a Ramai, and then I'll give it to you. So he went and he found witnesses, and there was a miscommunication here. So Rabbi Bar Huna said to the witnesses, do you know that he's not a Ramai? Do you know that he is a Ramai? And they said yes. They thought he had said not a Ramai. So Rav Papa's father turned to them and said, well, I'm a Ramai? And they said, no, we meant to say that he's not a Ramai. So there was some confusion there. Rabbi Bar Huna said it's logical that they misheard, because you wouldn't bring witnesses to prove that you are a Ramai. Obviously, he knew that these witnesses are not going to say that. Now we begin our next Mishnah that says what happens if you're holding on to a lost object for quite a while. How do you maintain it? How do you offset those expenses? So the Mishnah says if it's a object that can work for its own keep, like for example, if it's an animal that you could use to work and it'll earn money, so then let it work it, and then use the money that you earn from it to pay its feed. Don't sell it because the person's going to want his object back, not a different one. If, however, it's something that doesn't work for its own food, then sell it, don't bother feeding it. That way he can not lose the value while you're feeding it. Says the Mishnah, this can be seen in the pasuk where the Torah says, "V'hashiv lo yisela," you should return it to him. How else do you return it to him if you sold it? Now, what should you do with the money if you did sell it? So Rabbi Tarfon says use it, and you just owe him any money. It doesn't have to be that one. Therefore, if something happens to the money, if it gets lost, it's your problem because you can use it. And therefore, it's part of your money now. Rabbi Kiva says, leave the money on the side, don't use it. That way, if something happens and it gets lost, you are not responsible for it. Now, the Gemara asks, when he said that you have to work it and use that to pay off the feed, how long do you have to keep these animals? How long do you have to continue to do this for the person who lost it? So Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, 12 months. Of course, a brisa that specifies different things for different kinds of animals. Brisa says anything which works and can work off its own food, like an ox or a donkey, work on it, keep it for 12 months, take care of it for that long. Afterwards, sell it and put the money aside. Now, young calves and young horses that can't work, keep them for 3 months, and afterwards put the money aside. Chickens and geese and roosters that don't provide anything, so keep them for 30 days, then sell them and put the money aside. Nachman Bar Yitzchak says a hen who produces eggs is like a large animal that actually works, and therefore you can keep it for 12 months. Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa. It says that, but it also says other things which are different than we said before. The brisa says a hen and a large animal you can keep for 12 months. Afterwards, sell them and put the money aside. Calves and young horses keep for 30 days. Afterwards, put the money aside. Roosters and geese and anything else that requires a lot of care, just take care of it for 3 days and afterwards put the money aside. So the Gemara says you have this brisa is different than our Mishnah as far as calves and horses and as far as roosters and geese. Versus it's not a kasha. Calves and horses depends if you have farmland, if you have areas for them to eat grass on their own that doesn't cost you, or if you have to feed them grain or oats, then it costs more, and therefore you should take care of it for less time. As far as chickens and roosters, it depends if they're large ones or small ones. Large ones are harder to take care of, and therefore you should take care of it for less time. Now, back to the Mishnah, we said anything which doesn't work, you should sell. That says, how are you going to be able to return it to him if he's going to eat out his entire value, and therefore you should sell it. You should sell the calves, the young horses, the geese, and the roosters.